And for a closer look at the meeting between Presidents Xi and Biden, we turn now to Yoon Sun. She is a senior fellow and co-director of the China East Asia program at the Stimson Center. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Elaine, for having me.
Well, we are still waiting on official word about what was discussed in this meeting between Presidents Xi and Biden. But what are your impressions of what you've seen and heard so far, some of the video and photos of their initial meeting?
Well, I think so far the impression has been exceedingly positive, right? All the details that have been arranged are conveying the sense that the two countries and the two leaders are finally coming together to talk about the stabilization of their relations. They're keen to establishing some common understandings and consensus about the directions for future of this relationship. And they are not avoiding the hard issues. They're talking about the competition. They're talking about their differences in terms of domestic value, as well as their visions for international system. But I think the most important takeaway is the two leaders are talking and they're engaged in an honest and constructive engagement with each other. And that hopefully will provide the stability that a lot of the people and honestly the rest of the world has been hoping for.
Yeah, there was a sense that both sides didn't want to really raise expectations ahead of this meeting, that gathering face-to-face would be enough and then would go from there. So what would you say would be considered a success for each side?
I think for people who are not holding high expectations about this meeting, look, it's fair that cooperation currently for the U.S. and China, given their current state of the competition and the relationship, is very difficult to achieve. But outside competition, outside cooperation, there are still a lot of issues that the two countries can talk together. Like, for example, high up on the U.S. priority list is conflict prevention, is communications at the time of crisis. And I think those are extremely important for the U.S.-China relationship going forward. And meanwhile, we know that there are common threats and issues that U.S. and China need each other for. For example, the U.S. fentanyl crisis here domestically is the #1 issue for the domestic political point of view, and it requires China's assistance. And this idea is that U.S. really needs China to come back to the meal-to-meal dialogue in order to keep the channels of communications open in preparation for the time of crisis. That's also extremely important for the U.S. policy towards China. So to have a very high bar for this summit is unfair. But I think it is only fair that we expect the two leaders to talk about the basic fundamentals of this relationship and go from there.
Right, and we do know that the world has gotten more complicated since these two leaders met in person in Bali a year ago. We have these geopolitical conflicts. How does the China-U.S. relationship impact the global community? And is it likely that they could work together on some of those geopolitical issues happening right now and ahead?
Well, that is a hope, right? For example, in the case of the Gaza crisis that is currently still escalating in the Middle East, well, the U.S. hope has been for China to use its influence over Iran so that Iran does not play an escalatory and provocative role that drives the tension even higher in the region. And in the case of the Ukraine crisis, in the Ukraine war, actually, we all know that U.S. demand for China has been the minimum is for China not to provide lethal weapons to Russia. And on top of that, U.S. is also hoping that China would play a mediation role to convince Russia to tone down and moderate its position, come back to the negotiation table, and find a solution to the war. So yes, indeed, in terms of the geopolitical challenges, there are many areas that the two countries can work together, or at the minimum, talk to each other.
Right, we know that climate is something in which both nations agree. We have COP28 coming up in just a few weeks. Following this, what's next for relations between these two countries? Because we also have the CEO summit, so there's a lot of trade and economics involved as well.
Well, based on what we have seen so far out of this meeting and before this meeting, trade and economic relationship is actually one area that we haven't seen a lot of concrete, tangible deliverables, for example, on the reduction of the tariffs or some of the removal of some of the U.S. high-tech restriction, export control measures against China. I think that is area we're seeing less of concrete and tangible deliverables or even discussions about it. And I think that signifies the potential or the most likely prospect that the U.S. is not going to drop its tariff and is not going to drop its export control measures against China. So on that, I think that is going to be a much longer battle and a much longer negotiation process that the two countries will have to engage in.
All right, a lot to look forward to in the hours ahead. Yoon Sun, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.